G'day guys, Tobini Yogini here, back with another White Crow medicinal video. And today I'm doing a follow-up recording of the part 2. A little bit more of like the theory and the underpinnings of what I kind of went into a little bit in the esoteric world yesterday around this sacred heartstone that I call it. Now, in that video I kind of left off it making a few points that this cross down the bottom of the stone, I'll put a different angle on, has significance, and it also then links to the hey selves, it also links to the divine ticks as well. So what's the link between the divine tick, or that symbology that has been used to symbolize like angel wings or archangels, so archangels or angels, their wings, but it's also divine in its maths. But what link do the angel wing ticks representing the two Pleiadian sisters, the older and the younger, but albeit both divine and one just being a little bit younger, so it's a little bit of a smaller tick, but same mathematics. What link does that tick or those ticks have to this cross? Hi selves, buddy, you're choosing the wrong time to do this, mate. Good boy, come on, back in your bed. Good boy, little visitor. He loves the camera, he comes on every video now. So what happens, and there's this other curve right at the, just after the start or the inception point of the two lines that create the 33 degree. So what does all this symbology mean? Like what does that truly represent? Well, let's just jump straight into it. Straight into some of the theory and the workings around that then represented on this stone, opposed to then going from the stone, just so we can paint the holistic picture on what this all represents. Now, I'm kind of sat behind a painting that kind of symbolizes all of what this means. And it's my own painting of the rainbow serpent, but I'm only showing you a little bit right now. I'll show it maybe after we talk all through this, just to then see how it can come through in a creative story or a yarn or a dreaming. Alright, so that all being said, this is a chit chat chai video. We're sparking up. Boom shanty. Alright. Okay. So I'm just going to summarize a little bit of that first video. There we go. I'm just going to summarize some of that first video and do some drawings and then show you. Obviously it's a little bit easier to probably understand me inside without competing with noisy conditions, so I kind of want to show the two respects here, because you know, we see this concept in society of it being very, you know, structured, mathematical and thought based, and then also flowy. So we have to respect both. So part 1 being outside, connected to the mother, and now we're hitting the books and being structured, masculine. Part 2, that's just how it needs to work. So we need to just retrain the mind. And I'll show why. Alright, so in that first video we kind of talk about the link between the sine and the cos wave and how they create DNA when you graph them. And then the link between the 33 degree being the part of the dreaming yarn of where the creation of humans and our DNA have come from. But what's that next link? we jump into the angels and, you know, that link through Zeus and that story, and we see the similarities in the indigenous yarns of the Pleiadian sisters migrating across and then breeding. So we're starting to see this deeper picture here. But what next? What else is there? Well, I'm just going to start by drawing a few things so we can just, get back to up to speed. Alright. Boom. So we have our two sine and cos waves that are basically the same shape, but they're just offset by a magnitude of degree. So what does that actually say? Well, as a graph, we link sine and cos to, in mathematics, to geometry, to triangles. And triangles are directly linked to circles. And we use triangles to work out the lengths of arcs, that word again, arc, work out arc, areas, a number of things. So triangles are beautiful. And there's a correlation between triangles and a circle. But there's also then a correlation between the linear and the radial, because we can graph our sine and cos waves on a linear graph that goes on for infinity as an oscillating functionality. So that says to me, and the math says, that there is a connection between our linearity and our radial nature. So how do we start to explore that? Well, this is how we do that. Alright, so I'm going to start, turn that over. Alright. So, we're not going to do anything super complex here in the mathematical department, right? And I'll explain everything. Alright. So everyone's probably seen some crosshairs in their time. And in the mathematics, we usually represent them as X and Y. Right? So, two-dimensional grid. Nothing crazy, right? So what that says, those little arrowheads, basically mean that that cross goes out and keeps extending out to infinity in all four directions, right? And we can say that everything goes out towards infinity like that. So based on whatever value we stop along the way from 0 up to infinity, and if we call that, we can start to get shapes on that grid. So what happens if we just draw a circle onto that grid? That is, mathematically we can do that. We get something like that, right? But what we need to do to this one is add some labels. So this goes out to infinity, which is basically what time is, right? We have this linear spectrum that feels like it just keeps on going forever, even if the human experience passes with time goes on, everyone's probably lost a loved one and time still goes on. So we know that there's this kind of a never-ending element and it feels linear, but we know that there's something that's just not quite right there. Feels linear, but there's something else. So all of a sudden, what happens if I have a circle on a linear time frame? Well, I really start to get something. I get this infinitely large circle that, depending on where we are on those axes, can be as huge as humongous as we want, up to infinity. Alright, so then how do we work out the area of a circle? Well, we know through our, geometry that we've all studied that there's certain formulas for area of a circle and a square. So we also know that no, that's horrendous. That's such a horrendous shape right here. Gosh. Alright. So what happens if we have something like that? Well, we can start to make some mathematical observations based on our expression of the infinite. Because mathematics is really allowing us to explore, and algebra allows us to explore the infinite. And that's what it's there to do. So what that says to me is it's there to explore the universe, because that fundamentally is what we all come from, is this infinite capacity. Alright, but what's so special about this shape? Well, immediately you can start to see that there is a circle amongst that linear projection across space and time. So that says that there's a relationship between our creating something linear and that linearness having a radial impact. So how do we work that out? Well, that is a fascinating one. So there's a few things that we can do here. So firstly, let's examine the top half. Let's examine the first quadrant of this shape. Let's do that, okay? So what do we have? Well, we have something that looks like this. Alright. We have something like that. Well, we have our 0 point, or our center point, and we have an arc, a quarter of a circle, that is going out at a radius of infinity to create this circle. So what can we do with that? Well, we also know that in and amongst that arc, we can form a square by creating a right angle like this. So what do we have there? Well, what we have there is something incredible. So we have this capacity of going from 0 to infinity, and then we have a link of infinity being a radius, but then we also have a square forming some... Oh well, just clicked it, there we go. Alright, back on. Alright, sorry, the memory card just bloody got full. Alright, so we have this relationship between a smaller square with an arc, but we also then have a relationship with a larger square to the whole circle. So we have a relationship square to arc, square to whole circle, which means there's got to be something going on there, right? There's some sort of link. Alright, well let's dive into it. Okay, so what does that say? Well, the area of a square is its base times its height. Well, in this case, it's infinity times by infinity. Or, area of this square is equal to infinity squared. E infinity squared. Wow. Now where else have we seen infinity squared? Alright. So the area of that square is infinity squared. Now what does that mean for that arc or that quadrant of that circle? How do we work that out? Well, what we can do, ladies and gentlemen, is a number of things. We know that that arc is going to be equal across the whole circle. So we can divide it by 4 because that's just where the area is. So then we can go back to our original shape and see the whole circle and work it out from there. So our area for a circle is pi times by our radius squared. That's the area of a circle. Alright. And we know in this case that our radius is infinity. So we have the area of our circle equaling pi timesing by infinity squared. Pi times by infinity squared. Wow. Okay. Now, we just worked out that the area of that smaller square is also infinity squared. Wow, okay, there's a connection here. There's a very, very big, deep connection here that is just starting to unfold. Now, let's have a look at the angle and curvature of which is occurring here in that arc. Where else have we seen angles and curve of an arc like that before? On this rock to these curves. But Toby, that looks like a tick and that's just a quarter of a curve. How does that mark here relate to what we're showing here on the paper? Well, that's a beautiful question. And then moreover, how does those curved lines relate to that crosshatch at the bottom of it? How? Like what's going on there? How can we work this all out? Well, this is a beautiful, beautiful phenomena that is divine mathematics. Okay, so we have this relationship, and in maths we always look about area under the curve, or subtracting a greater area away, a smaller area away from a greater area to see what the leftover bit is. So realistically, we could do that here and work out the area of this section left out. And I'll colour that in just to make it clear. Alright. Boom. So, anyone that is, has done a little bit of maths in their time knows that in order to work out an area under a curve, you have to be able to integrate. So we know that this concept of integration and its comrade being differentiation are a part of this sequence to understand curves, understand what's going on here in mathematics. So we went from a differentiation thing. It links higher orders of algebraic function to lower orders of magnitude. So our third dimension is governed by an order of magnitude of algebra, but there's a higher order of magnitude of algebra that differentiates itself into, and so that there's an angle of that happening, and we know that through our examination of light, because when light passes through two bodies that have different density, they refract and split and create angles. So there's something here going on of this sense and phenomena that was linked to the light of the DNA and the electromagnetic spectrum of this coin, which is the infinite scale of sine and cos, and then linking its linearity to something that's radial. And we have that as radians in mathematics. So that is basically giving a decimal point as an integer on a number line that is correlating to some form of radial progression. So it's possible in maths. We do it already. This is what's going on. Now the beauty between this coin and the unlockings of our DNA and the beautiful harmonics and the esoteric story that I went into in part 1 also says that that curve is part of, or these ticks are part of, the Fibonacci sequence or the golden ratio in mathematics. Wow. Now what does that all look like? So much so that I've literally tattooed the golden ratio on my leg because it is one part of this phenomena that is just incredible. Alright. So, that all being said, let's do some things. I'm just going to go and just write some stuff on the paper and then we'll come back into it all. Alright. So, we have Alright, so now we have an equation that is solvable. We have this sense of infinity squared, which is the area of this small, the smaller top quadrant square, minus pi times by infinity squared divided by 4, because we know the whole area of this circle is pi r squared, and we just have 4 of them, so we can just divide it by 4, easy maths. And that's equal to that area. Wow, alright, so all of a sudden we have infinity, pi, and 4. Now, in quantum mathematics and mechanics, and all the rest of it, you can actually do a summation, which I spoke about in the previous video, of... I'll write it, we have this. So what that says is 1 plus x, or 1 plus 0 plus 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7, all the way up to infinity. What does that equal? Now, I'm not going to show this proof today because it does get fucking long and everything else. So you'll have to trust me on this. But I can do it in a later video just because I want to speed through a few things. Okay, but if you do that, you actually get a phenomenal number called negative 1/12. What the fuck? How do you go up to infinity and get negative 1/12? Well, you just have to take my word for that. So what does that actually mean? Well, when we substitute that value in based on other summations, we get two numbers, because it's a quadratic, so we can solve for it. We'll get two outcomes, right? One that makes sense and one that doesn't make sense. And the one that makes sense directly links to the golden ratio. Well, they both make sense, but in mathematical means, in a quadratic perspective, based on the based on the points about that we're working from, and because it's linked to the golden ratio, we start to see something fucking magical happen. So we have this sense of a circle. Then we have the area of a curve. And that area of a curve is then based on the line of that curve, which is a circle, and that circle and its area directly corresponds to the golden ratio, which is then directly correlated to the Fibonacci sequence. Wow, alright, we're starting to see all the divine mathematical principles that have remained phenomena starting to dance harmonically with one another. Okay, how do we go? Well, we're starting to see the infinite, we've seen the circle, we've got the mathematics of this tick, which is the divine golden ratio, golden being golden children or the golden age or the golden sisters from Zeus, gold being the sun, coming from the stars or the Pleiadian sisters, represented by this golden ratio, these two ticks on this stone that's corresponding with the mathematics. Wow, wow, wow. Alright, we're starting to merge the two worlds here. The scientific and the history. Hoo, hoo, hoo. How dare we do that? Okay, what's the next point in all of this? Alright, so once we see the golden ratio, that's just a series of collaborations of circles and squares in and amongst itself. So I'm just going to draw something real quick, just to get this going. That's there. Alright, so we have something like that, right, start to form up. So we have this golden ratio that turns in on itself, but when we start to draw lines that are actually parallel to one another, that formulate the crosshatch grid, we see that it's at an angle. It's at this angle. So it's what is that angle? Well, we're seeing that we have this sense of wholeness that's represented through each one of the arcs, but then all of a sudden it starts to turn in on itself, and that angle turning in corresponds to here. Now let's examine this top part. I'll draw that a little bit better. Basically what we have is we have the arc of the golden ratio intersecting one of those perpendicular lines that formulate the grid. What angle is that? Well, I'll tell you. It comes out to be 137.5 degrees. Also, just so happens to be the angle of intersection of the small crosshatch on this rock. So what does that say? Well, that says that from source, or from the singular point of magnetism that everything resonates from, that we know to be true across the esoteric and scientific capacity that's coming out, from that darkness, from that internal oneness, that infinite inner part, everything comes from. But we also need to have a link from everything being so big linking back. Now that's through the radial link between a linear scale and a circle, in which we just showed that. And now we're starting to see that there has to be some link between the golden ratio and a grid that creates some form of angle that also then has respect to the physical or the physics of our universe, and Snell's law, the angle of refraction. We start to see that now, and that's represented across this actual grid that creates a square grid still across the whole thing, because the circles still fit in that, but in and amongst that they have this curling in effect in that magnetic space that is above space, that creates space and time, that is the wholeness of the infinite spectrum, that is the fullness of the electromagnetic spectrum, that is light. We are the light. And that area under the curve has to go somewhere, right? That's the impedance. That, my friend, the area under the curve is the feedback that is absorbed in each one of those segments. And what is that? Well, that has to be some form of point of singularity or of magnetism that draws it in. And that's consciousness. We all have that. Everything is that. That is the flow. It is everything. That's why they say that the whole world is a holograph theory. But it's not really a holograph. It's this whole kind of happening all at once that has the infinite capacity to come back in on itself. And that's why we have these infinite things where they cross and they form and flow and then go back out and come in, and because it is the light spectrum. And that's represented on this rock that has stood the test of time, that links all the esoteric underpinnings of the dreaming yarns of Australia, that showcases our blood coming from the Pleiadians and also from Orion's belt. I'll do another follow-up video of the golden ratio and, you know, everything else that comes with that in the masculine side of the part. And isosceles triangles, and then that linking to the Southern Cross and Orion. All that will come in another video, but this is fundamental. This is number one, because this shows that from the nothingness, or from the womb of the earth, of the universe, we have all come from. And it needs to then shift out and rattle how, in the third dimension, how we see and perceive the world. Because the feminine essence has been undermined and disrespected for far too long, and that's our mother, that's Mother Earth, that is everything, that is the place of creation that we all come from, and we needed to start to embody it as a whole. And the ancestors knew that. They saw the Pleiadian sisters, they saw that feminine essence coming from the stars back towards us, and then creating what we are now, mixing their DNA, merging it, and it's through activating our DNA that we get to go back to that holy space that we were created in divinity. And it's through understanding how the curves and the sacredness coded into our DNA structure from a visual perspective, and what information that holds, what that links into a light sense, the common denominators across the whole spectrum, that is the mathematics, that is the sacred geometry of it all. We all know that. Everyone's there. But this is the link between our blood lineage and everything. And so this angle of refraction, which is 137.5 degrees, links directly to the golden ratio, which then links to wormholes and creation. So what does this all mean? Well, when we go back to examining the body as a whole, we know that then, based on our DNA and our blood, we are a light being. We are the light. We are coming from this space. It's there in the proof. The math says it. We are creating and co-creating to and fro with one another in this magnetism, right? So then in one of my first videos I showcase how we have this polarity. So we have this linear scale that goes on in our internal form. And once we reach our internal form, once our spine or our kundalini is fully awakened, then through our third eye we actually get to project our soul at the angle of 137.5 degrees via... We have to know that what angle, and we can only reach that angle through our posture. Once our posture there, it fundamentally opens that, because it's coded into the mathematics. It's the quantum realm. So as soon as you get to there, it is all available, and it's coded in that angle of reflection coming from the center point into our 3D of light, because all the dimensions are coming from that singular point, but the third dimension has an angle of refraction that is based on the golden ratio. angle of refraction based on the golden ratio. So coming from singular source, curving in from that infinite, all of a sudden down into our finite senses of self that we are ultimately connected through the quantum realm. And this is the mathematical underpinning that links it to the blood. It's there in plain sight. Australia is the creation place of our DNA, and it has been bred through pleiadians coming here, two sisters, and the whole history is written on this rock. We have 137.5 degrees, we have 33 degrees. They are all linked, they all create resonance, they all create harmony, they are all divinely coded into the architecture of our reality. So we now must know what it means to embody this information. It means to know that we are all the same, we are all points and nodal points of consciousness that create this grid across the universe. Literally every point of consciousness. It's not just each human, it's all the plants, it's the animals, it is all the intergalactic beings, it is all the elementals, it is all the esoteric. Each point of those points is a point of consciousness, period. And it's up to us to find our internal oneness again, coming back to our alignment of what we are here to be, so our third eye can remain true and connected to source, and we can receive those messages coming in at the angle of reflection and then coming down into our center of self, that then we can push out into our ethereal body that then ripples back into us, and so on and so forth, in this ever breathing to and fro loop that is the sacred circle of life. Alright. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Let me just make sure I've covered everything. Oh yeah, just another quick one. So when we look at wormholes, we are traveling through, when we astral project, we have to travel through a wormhole. So in order to travel through a wormhole, you have to understand that you go into this wormhole at the golden ratio and then come out the other side through it. So then it creates this compacting into a point and then exploding out. And so I have that here represented in the snake. So here is this wormhole where you come from one and then you come down in, and it creates between the light body and the material, which is the particleization or the DNA. So we have the pure light source up here, and then it comes through the sacred geometry of our triangles into the wormhole so we can have consciousness, and then it is then activated into our DNA, and then it radiates out into our auric field or our light body. And this is how we activate our kundalini, this is how we come one with source, this is the mathematical underpinning, the esoteric and the art that represents it all. And the indigenous blood, the indigenous culture has been holding that down here in Australia through all the suppression, and it's now time that we can embody it all as truth. Alright, I really hope you have enjoyed this video and the follow-up to part 1. This is that deeper sense of really going into this and seeing the symbology and the mathematics side of it, and then linking it to that esoteric first video. Alright guys, thank you so much.